From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
California Governor Gavin Newsom challenges Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to a debate. Good idea? President Biden declares the pandemic is over and explains why he hasn't yet decided whether to run for a second term. Plus, Joe Manchin and his permitting bill still hasn't seen the light of day, and more Democrats are coming out against it. What's going on in the back rooms of the Senate on the promise that Democratic leaders made to Senator Manchin for his vote on their climate and spending bill? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot. Today is Political Potpourri Day here on Potomac Watch as we cover a variety of political topics that have been unfolding. I'm here with my distinguished colleagues, Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. Welcome to you both. So I kind of like this story, fun story. Gavin Newsom trying to get some press, challenging Ron DeSantis in a tweet to a debate. He knows, Newsom does, that DeSantis is the governor Republican that the Democrats and the mainstream media hate almost as much as they hate Donald Trump. And indeed, some are already saying he's scarier than Donald Trump because he's smarter than Donald Trump. So Newsom is picking a fight with him, and he's trying to position himself pretty clearly, Kim, to run for president if Joe Biden does not. There'll be no waiting on Kamala Harris, a fellow Californian, now vice president, if Joe Biden doesn't run for Gavin Newsom. What do you make of his offer to DeSantis, and should Governor DeSantis take it?
Well, the part that I really love the most in that tweet in which he challenged DeSantis to a debate was when he said, since you have only one overriding need, attention, let's take this up and debate. And I just was laughing because who's seeking attention there? This is clearly Newsom trying to get himself into the headlines because, as you said, he has presidential ambitions. Now, if I was Ron DeSantis, I'd probably give this a pass only because, unlike Gavin Newsom, DeSantis is running in a competitive state for re-election. He didn't win by a huge margin last time, and the polls show that his competitor, Charlie Crist, is not that far behind him now, so he has other things on his mind. But, as a broader concept, I would love to see such a debate, in part because it would let people see Ron DeSantis unfiltered rather than the way that the media loves to portray him, but also just as a compare and contrast between governance models between Florida and California. I think it would be very useful for Americans to hear those two go toe-to-toe as to why everyone's leaving California and arriving in Florida.
But why wouldn't it be good for DeSantis to take this, Kim? I mean, what happens if he does take it? You get a bit of attention and could separate himself from Donald Trump a little bit.
Sure. No, I think that there are potentially reasons for him to do it beyond the day-to-day things he has going on in order to get reelected this year. And I think that's one thing. Part of it will actually come down to what you just said is, what is Ron DeSantis thinking about for his own future? Is he going to bow out, step aside if Donald Trump says he's running again? Or does he intend to go and do that regardless of Donald Trump being in the ring? I think that if Donald Trump is going to run and DeSantis decides to challenge him, this could be a really great moment for him because even though a lot of voters know him across the country, he obviously doesn't have the same exact profile as Donald Trump, and this would be quite the thing to watch.
I guess the one calculation DeSantis would have to make, Kyle, is whether or not that could hurt him a bit in his re-election campaign. As Kim said, he can't count on the one-party state that Gavin Newsom can count on. Florida's still quite competitive. The statewide elections there, whether for president, governor, senator, have in recent years been very, very close. DeSantis only won by 32,400 votes or so in 2018. And, I'm sure somebody on his staff is arguing, look, if you win this race by 6 for re-election or 8 or more, that's going to be a catapult into the presidential if that's what you're interested in as much as anything. On the other hand, if it's 1 or 2, it won't be so good. Kyle.
Yeah, and I think the political upside is similar for DeSantis and Newsom. I mean, Newsom wants to run in 2024 if Biden doesn't. He knows he's probably going to be facing the sitting vice president, and Kamala Harris has failed to impress for all sorts of reasons. But still, if you're a governor of a state like California, you're not really a national figure. Clearly, he's trying to become a national figure, and that's part of what this debate would do. And I think similar for DeSantis on the upside, and whether or not Trump runs, I mean, here's an opportunity to go toe-to-toe with somebody in the opposition and show You have what it takes to win the debates in 2024. I think the risk is just on the downside. I mean, for Newsom, it is really hard to imagine something that could happen to him in a debate that would cause him to lose the governorship of a state as blue as California. And it is a little easier to imagine that in Florida. I mean, DeSantis is leading the Democratic nominee in the gubernatorial race, Charlie Crist, by about 4 points in the Real Clear Politics average. And that's a pretty healthy margin in a state as close as Florida. We're used to seeing these gubernatorial and Senate races divided really by just razor thin margins. Nobody can claim victory on election night, and it has to go into the next day. That's kind of what we're used to in Florida. On the other hand, maybe DeSantis would prefer to try to get that 6-point lead than to risk sort of a catastrophic debate moment. I mean, the one that comes to mind is Rick Perry, saying he was going to eliminate 3 departments and then he couldn't quite remember which 3. Now, I don't think DeSantis would do something quite exactly like that, but there is a bit of a risk there. To the more broad point, I mean, I agree with Kim that I think this would be great. Maybe if DeSantis says no, we can loop Glenn Youngkin, governor of Virginia, or another Republican into this sort of thing. Because I think it's become pretty easy for politicians to be shielded by their aides, not get a lot of tough questions from the press, although DeSantis certainly does. But if politicians don't want to do that, it's easy enough to take only the interviews they think they are going to be friendly, to tweet to their supporters, and not really do this kind of debating thing that is really what we need to make the decisions between the styles of governance that Americans want.
DeSantis gave a very interesting and good speech to the National Conservative Conference that met in Miami this month. A very long speech, and he explained his COVID policy, why he thought it was superior to keep Florida open, why he made that decision, education choice policies, parental transparency and rights to see the school curriculum. And it was a pretty extensive attack on woke elites in politics, academia, and even business. And he referred to the Great American Exodus, which he called it, from states like California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, to Florida and Texas. And he had a lot of facts and figures at his disposal. It sure looked to me like a lot more than, though it was rooted in Florida, it was also designed to appeal him to a potentially national Republican electorate. And if I were Donald Trump, I would look at that and say, that guy actually could be a fairly formidable contender if he decides to run against me.
Right. The purpose of that speech was, in essence, to compare and contrast those models, even absent a Newsom debate. And some of the stats he brought with him were pretty eye-popping. He pointed out that since the beginning of COVID, more wealth has come into Florida at any time in history over a similar time period. He also noted the concern that some red states have that when you get these influxes of people, that they will change the politics. But he pointed out that when he was elected, there were nearly 300,000 more registered Democrats in the state than Republicans. Now there are some 271,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. And he also made a contrast with New York, which he pointed out was the state with the closest population to Florida, biggest rival in that regard, and noted that New York's budget was twice the size of Florida's, even though Florida had better roads, better schools, and has no income tax. So that's the kind of model that he would be promoting, and the kind of changes and regulations and laws if he were to run for the president. And yeah, if I were Donald Trump, I mean, Donald Trump probably doesn't worry about any of this stuff because I don't think he calculates that way. But I would be concerned because this is a guy who really has a vision, but also is able to articulate it with facts and policies and details, which is something that Donald Trump has great connection to some of his voters, but he was never that guy, never able to sort of sell a bigger message beyond make America great again, which was always a little vague.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's just not able to articulate a real conservative platform with any kind of depth. And DeSantis can. And that's why I think your point about California model versus the Florida model in the form of Newsom versus DeSantis could be so interesting and instructive to voters. But we probably won't get that until, well, we'll see. Maybe in 2024, maybe not.